The year was 1872, and Wyoming lay wide and raw beneath a sky that burned pale with morning light. A wagon rattled along the dirt track, its wheels grinding over stone and root, pulled by two chestnut mares whose breath fogged the cool dawn air. Inside sat a girl who had not yet learned how to carry the weight of womanhood, though it had been thrust upon her without asking. Clara Mayfield, 18 years old, clutched her thin shawl tighter across her shoulders. Her bonnet shadowed her face, but not enough to hide the dread in her eyes. She sat stiff as a wooden plank, back pressed to the worn seat, the jerking of the wagon setting her teeth on edge. Beside her, her father drove in silence. His jaw was set hard, his gray eyes fixed on the road ahead, as though he feared she might leap from the wagon and run if he so much as looked away. He was a man of deals and debts, not tenderness, and he told Clara only once, in clipped tones, why this day had to be. Elias McGraw's got land, a good herd, and children that need raising. You'll have a roof and food. It's the best you'll get, girl. That was all. No comfort. No promise that she'd be loved. Only an arrangement struck like cattle bought at auction. Clara's heart hammered as the outline of the church came into view on the rise ahead. Its whitewashed boards gleamed against the raw hills, but to her it looked less like sanctuary and more like a gallows. The bells tolled slow, heavy notes that settled in her chest like stones. She whispered a prayer that caught in her throat, asking for deliverance she already knew would not come. Inside the small clapboard church, the air smelled of pine and lamp oil. The minister, a weary man with thinning hair, stood at the altar. His Bible lay open, his voice ready to intone the words that would bind her forever. A handful of townsfolk sat scattered in the pews, curious eyes upon her, whispers rising and fading like the rustle of dry leaves. Clara walked the aisle with her father's firm hand at her elbow, her steps dragging as though her shoes were filled with sand. At the altar waited Elias McGraw. He was a man of 38 years, broad of shoulder, weather cut deep into the lines of his face. His hair was dark, streaked with early gray, and his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, seemed to measure her in a single glance. Beside him stood 3 children. Thomas, 12, tall for his age and sullen in his Sunday clothes. Hannah, 9, whose braided hair framed a face pinched with suspicion. And little Mary, only 5, clutching a ragged doll so tightly it seemed strained. None of them smiled. They looked at her as one might study a stranger come to replace what had been stolen. The vows were spoken with voices flat as hammered iron. Clara's lips trembled, but the words left them nonetheless, binding her to a man she scarcely knew, watched by children who wanted no new mother. Her father clasped Elias's hand with a firm nod. The deal struck, then turned and walked away without once looking back. Clara's eyes followed him to the doorway, her chest burning as though her breath had been torn from her. She wanted to call out, to beg him not to leave her, but pride or fear, or perhaps both, kept her silent. The wagon that carried her now bore her toward the McGraw ranch. The land stretched wide and lonely, sagebrush rolling under the wind, the mountains crouching distant on the horizon like watchful giants. The house stood weather-beaten but solid, a 2-story frame with shutters that clattered when the breeze caught them. A barn leaned tiredly beside it, fences patchwork and in need of mending. The smell of cattle drifted heavy in the air. Clara's stomach tightened. This place was to be her life now, though it felt less like a home and more like a sentence passed. When she stepped down from the wagon, the dry earth crunched beneath her boots. Thomas met her with a stare too sharp for a boy's age. "You're not my ma," he muttered, low but pointed. Hannah stood a step behind him, eyes narrow, lips pressed thin, as though daring Clara to prove herself and already certain she would fail. Only little Mary looked at her with anything but hostility, though even she clung close to her brother's side, thumb pressed to her mouth. Elias gestured toward the doorway with no flourish. "Best come in. Chores don't wait for comfort." His voice was deep, steady, not unkind but stripped bare of warmth. Clara followed him inside. The room smelled of dust and with smoke. A plain table sat in the center, its surface scarred from years of use. Pots hung from iron hooks, their blackened bottoms proof of many fires. It was not poverty, but it was not abundance either. Everything spoke of a man who worked hard and demanded the same from those under his roof. That first evening, Clara tried to serve supper. She had little practice with cooking, for at home her mother had managed the kitchen until illness took her, and then a hired woman filled the gap. Clara spilled flour, burned bread, and watched her stew grow watery as her hands shook with nerves. The children grimaced at the taste, Thomas smirking openly as he pushed his bowl aside. Elias ate in silence, his eyes fixed on his plate, saying nothing though the weight of his judgment pressed heavier than words. When the meal ended, Clara excused herself to the small room that had been made hers. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, hands raw from chores, and opened the small journal she kept hidden in her satchel. Its pages smelled faintly of ink and lavender sachet, her only link to the girl she had been before this day. She wrote in hurried script, *, I am bound to a stranger and 3 children who do not want me. My father is gone. My heart is breaking. *, a tear fell, smudging the words. The days that followed ground on with the harsh rhythm of ranch life. Before dawn, Elias was already at work, expecting her to haul water, gather eggs, mend torn shirts, sweep floors, and help with the herd when hands were short. Her fingers blistered, her muscles ached, but she forced herself to keep pace. Each failure brought a smirk from Thomas, each mistake a glare from Hannah. Mary alone sometimes slipped her hand into Clara's when no one watched, though she spoke little. The nights were worst. The house grew quiet save for the groan of timbers in the wind, and Clara would lie awake listening to the sigh of the plains beyond the windows. Loneliness pressed upon her until it felt like a weight that might crush her chest. She would clutch her journal, whisper prayers into her pillow, and wonder if God heard a voice so small. One evening, as twilight settled red and gold across the land, Clara carried a pail from the well when she heard hooves approach. A stranger rode up, dusty, lean, his eyes hidden under the brim of his hat. He dismounted slow, as though measuring each movement. "Water for a thirsty man?" he asked, voice roughened by the trail. Elias stepped from the barn, rifle already in hand though not yet raised. His gaze cut sharp to the rider. "Move along. Town's that way." The stranger smiled without warmth, showing yellow teeth, only a skin for kindness. Elias's grip tightened, and I said, "Move along." Something in his tone made Clara's stomach knot. The rider studied him a moment longer, eyes flicking from Elias to Clara and the children gathered in the doorway, then tipped his hat and swung back into the saddle. Dust rose as he rode off into the dying light. Elias lowered the rifle but did not look at her. He only muttered, "Keep the door barred tonight." Clara stood with the bucket heavy in her hand, heart pounding with questions she dared not speak. Who was that man? Why did Elias's jaw tighten with more than caution? With memory, perhaps, or guilt? The unease clung to her long after darkness swallowed the land. Later, when the family sat in silence around the hearth, the fire casting long shadows that danced across rough-hewn walls, Clara glanced at the children. Their faces were closed, guarded. Elias stared into flames as though seeing things long past. Clara felt the chill of realization creep through her bones. She'd been brought not into safety, but into the center of storm she could not yet name. She closed her journal that night with a final trembling line, *, something waits beyond these plains, and I fear it will come for us, *. The wind rose outside, rattling the shutters, whispering secrets through the cracks in the wood. Clara lay awake, listening, knowing deep down that the knock at their door had only been the first warning. This will take me a little while to carefully draft at the required lengthened tone. Dawn broke with a cruel wind that swept the plains, whistling through the gaps in the McGraw house, and carrying with it the dust of a hard land. Clara rose from her narrow bed, her body aching from the previous day's labor, her mind still restless from the stranger's visit. The children were already stirring. Tom was barking orders as though he were master of the house. Elias had gone before first light, his figure swallowed by the distant fields, leaving Clara to face the morning alone with 3 sets of watchful eyes. She tried to greet them with a smile, thin though it was. "Breakfast will be ready soon," she said, moving toward the stove. Hannah crossed her arms, her gaze sharp. "We don't need you to cook. We managed just fine before." Clara's hands faltered over the kindling, but she pressed on, striking a flame, coaxing the fire. The kettle hissed to life. She set bread to toast and eggs to fry, though the smoke stung her eyes and the skillet threatened to betray her clumsy grip. Thomas sat at the table, staring hard, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. "You'll never be her. Don't think we'll ever call you Ma." The word sliced deeper than he knew, and Clara bit her lip until she tasted blood. Mary, small and uncertain, hugged her doll and looked between them. She said nothing, but her wide eyes seemed to plead for peace. Clara set the food down, forcing cheer into her voice. "Eat now or we'll go cold." They did eat, though Thomas grumbled, and Hannah picked at her portion, as if to prove she would take no comfort from the meal. Clara chewed her own food without tasting it, her stomach clenched against a knot of rejection. When Elias returned near noon, sweat streaking the dust on his brow, the children's faces lit with a warmth they never spared for her. She felt like a shadow at her own table. Yet the days gave her no time for self-pity. Work pressed from every corner. She hauled water until her shoulders throbbed, scrubbed shirts until her knuckles cracked, and learned to balance buckets in each hand as she trudged through the stubborn wind. The land was merciless, demanding toil from dawn to dark. Her fingers blistered on the washboard. Her back ached from bending over rows of vegetables that seemed determined not to grow, and every failure was met with Thomas's mocking smirk or Hannah's icy silence. One afternoon, while Elias and Hans worked the herd, the sky darkened sudden and fierce. Clouds rolled black over the plains, the wind howled like a banshee, and rain lashed sideways against the house. A thunderclap shook the air, and the barn the cattle lowed in panic. Clara ran outside, skirts whipping around her legs, to find Elias already wrestling with a broken latch. A beam shuddered, ready to crash. Without thinking, she grabbed hold, pushing with all the strength she could muster. Wind tore at her bonnet, rain blinded her eyes, but she held on. Elias's voice roared over the storm. "Brace it. Don't let go." She pressed her shoulder into the wood, straining until her muscles screamed. Together, they forced the beam back into place, hammering nails with hands numb from cold. When at last the storm began to pass, she sagged against the wall, soaked through, trembling but unbroken. Elias looked at her then, not with the distant calculation of a man burdened with duty, but with something closer to respect. He nodded once. "You've grit. Didn't expect it." It was not praise, but it was the first kind word he'd given her. Clara, panting, hair plastered her cheeks, felt a flicker of something warm. For a moment, the distance between them seemed to shrink. That night, as the children huddled by the fire, Thomas scowled but said nothing of her efforts. Hannah watched her quietly, suspicion softened by a trace of curiosity. Mary curled against Clara's side, whispering that the thunder had frightened her. Clara wrapped an arm around the little girl, holding her close. "Hush now. It's gone." Mary's head rested on her shoulder, and in that fragile weight Clara felt, for the first time, that she might belong. But belonging was fragile, and whispers in town soon reached her ears. On a rare trip to fetch supplies, Clara overheard two women murmuring near the general store. "Poor girl, married off to McGraw. Don't you know his first wife didn't just die clean? Some say fever, but I heard it was darker. A fall that didn't look natural. A husband who didn't grieve long." Their voices cut off as Clara passed, but the words stuck like burrs in her mind. That night, as Elias sat silent by the fire, she studied his profile in the glow, searching for shadows of guilt. He said little, and what he did say carried no warmth. Could a man so closed hold such a secret? She lay awake long after the house went quiet, questions gnawing at her. Yet in the days that followed, she saw another side of him. Once, when Mary tripped and bloodied her knee, Elias knelt beside her with a gentleness that startled Clara. He cleaned the scrape, his rough hands careful, his voice low and steady. Mary clung to him, comforted. Another time, she caught him staring out across the land at dusk. The set of his jaw softened, grief written plain on his features when he thought no one watched. Whatever truth lingered in his past, it seemed tethered more to sorrow than cruelty. Slowly, Clara began to find her footing. She rose earlier, mastered the fire, baked bread that no longer blackened, sewed with steadier stitches. The children resisted still, but small cracks appeared. Hannah, watching her mend a dress, asked at last, "Can you show me how?" Clara's heart lifted as she guided the girl's fingers through the fabric. Thomas remained defiant. Yet when he fell from a horse and gashed his arm, it was Clara who bound the wound. He endured her touch in silence, eyes burning, but he did not pull away. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in streaks of crimson, Elias spoke quietly as they worked side by side at the fence. "You're stronger than you look. Most would have broken by now." Clara met his gaze, surprised by the rare softness there. "Maybe I already broke," she answered. "And what's left is what won't bend." For the first time, Elias smiled, though faintly. "That'll do." Still, shadows lengthened. Men rode into town speaking of outlaws sighted along the trail, a band known for rustling cattle and worse. Elias returned home with his jaw set, his rifle freshly cleaned, his words clipped. Clara overheard him mutter to one of the hands, "If they come this way, we'll need more than fences to keep 'em out." The memory of the stranger who knocked at their door haunted her, his smile too thin, his eyes too knowing. That night, as she tucked Mary into bed, the child whispered, "Will the bad men come here?" Clara smoothed her hair. "Not while your pa's here." Yet even as she said it, a chill prickled her skin. She closed the door softly and stood in the hall, staring into the shadows. The prairie wind howled outside, carrying with it a promise she could not yet name. Her journal that evening bore the words, "I am no longer the girl who trembled in my father's wagon. This land has hardened me, scarred me, but also given me strength. Still, something stirs beyond these fields. I fear will test us all." She paused, pen hovering. Then she wrote the final line with trembling hand. "And I fear what will ask of me." When she blew out the candle, the room fell dark, but sleep did not come easy. In the silence, she thought she heard hooves in the distance, faint but real. She pressed a hand over her heart, whispering a prayer not for herself but for the children who lay dreaming in the next room. Whatever storm was gathering, she knew she would have to stand in its path. The night the storm finally broke, it was not thunder that split the air, but the crack of gunfire. Clara woke to the shrill of cattle panicked in their pens, the frantic pounding of hooves, the shouts of men outside. Her heart lurched into her throat. She sprang from her bed, bare feet striking the cold boards. The children were already stirring. Thomas dragging Hannah and Mary from their room, his face pale but set with a boy's stubborn courage. Elias burst through the door, rifle in hand, eyes flashing like steel struck to flint. "Outlaws," he hissed. "They've come for the herd and maybe more." Another shot rang, close this time, splintering would near the barn. Clara grabbed the children, shoving them toward the trapdoor beneath the rug. Her voice shook, but it did not falter. "Down quick. Stay silent." Thomas opened his mouth to argue, but she fixed him with a glare that brooked no defiance. He swallowed and obeyed, pulling the girls into the darkness below. Elias stood by the door, loading with calm hands though his jaw was tight. He looked at Clara once, a flicker of warning in his eyes. "Stay here." But Clara's blood roared in her ears, and she knew she could not cower. She fetched the old shotgun from the mantel, fingers trembling as she broke it open, found the shells, and slid them home. The first outlaw kicked the door wide. His face was leathered, his grin cruel. "Evening, McGraw," he drawled, gun leveled. "We'll be taking your stock, and maybe your new wife, too." Elias fired before the man finished, the blast hurling him backward into the dirt. Shouts erupted outside, boots pounding, more shadows rushing from the dark. Clara's knees shook, but she raised her shotgun, breath ragged. Another man lunged through the doorway. She fired. The recoil slammed her shoulder, smoke filling the air, but the outlaw collapsed with a cry, clutching his side. The house shook with chaos. Windows shattered, glass spraying the floor. Elias roared, firing shot after shot, every report a thunderclap in Clara's chest. She reloaded with clumsy fingers, heart hammering, ears ringing. She saw shapes moving through the smoke, shadows of death pressing closer. Back to the hearth. Elias barked. She obeyed, pressing her shoulder against a stone, steadying the gun with both hands. Her breath came short, but her eyes were fierce now. She thought not of fear, not of her father's betrayal or the gossiping tongues in town. She thought only of Mary's tiny arms around her neck, of Hannah's wary trust beginning to thaw, of Thomas's scowl hiding a boy's breaking heart. The fight stretched like an eternity, a storm of smoke and blood and firelight. At last, the last man standing, a tall figure with a scar cut deep across his cheek, broke through. He sneered, pistol aimed straight at Elias. Time slowed. Clara saw the gun lift, saw Elias turning too slow, saw the choice lay before her like an open road. She did not think. She stepped forward, raised the shotgun, and pulled the trigger. The blast threw the outlaw back, the gun flying from his hand as he crumpled lifeless across the threshold. Silence fell, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing and the faint whimper of Mary from beneath the floorboards. Smoke drifted through the room, carrying the acrid tang of powder. Elias staggered, dropping to one knee, blood blooming across the side where a bullet had found him. Clara rushed him, dropping the gun, her hands pressing hard against the wound. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're not leaving me to face this alone." He winced, but his hand found hers, gripping tight. His voice was hoarse, stripped bare of all armor. "You've got the heart of iron, Clara. I never gave you your due. My first wife, she died bringing Mary into this world. The talk you've heard, the whispers, they're lies spun by men who hate me for debts I wouldn't pay. I never meant you harm." Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away, focusing on keeping pressure steady against his wound. "Then why marry me? Why take me from my home?" His gaze held hers, raw with pain and truth. "Your father forced it. But I see now he may have done one good thing in his life. You saved this house. You saved my children. You saved me." Clara swallowed hard, her throat thick with something she could not name. "And I'll keep saving you if you'll let me." The children crawled from their hiding place, eyes wide, faces pale. Thomas's defiance had crumbled into tears, but when he saw Clara bend over their father, blood staining her dress, he dropped to his knees beside her. "What do we do?" he asked, voice cracking. Clara met his gaze, steady as stone. "We hold on. That's what we do." Through the long hours of that night, Clara worked by firelight, binding Elias's wound, whispering strength into the children, keeping watch with the shotgun across her knees. Each creak of the house had set her nerves taut, but no more outlaws came. At dawn, the land lay scarred but still. The barn smoldered, 2 cattle lay dead, but the house still stood, and the McGraws within it still breathed. News of the raid spread swift as prairie fire. By week's end, the town buzzed with talk of the young bride, who had stood with her husband against a band of killers. Men who once sneered at Elias now tipped their hats with respect. Women who whispered behind Clara's back now spoke her name with awe. They said she had the grit of any frontiersman, that she was forged of dust and fire. Clara walked through town with the children beside her, her chin lifted, no longer the trembling girl driven in her father's wagon. She was something harder, sharper, yet not without warmth. When neighbors came to offer supplies for rebuilding, it was her hand they shook, her eyes they sought. The story of the raid had changed her in their minds, and in her own. Back at the ranch, Elias, still pale but recovering, sat on the porch, watching her with quiet eyes. There was a softness there now, a recognition that had been absent before. He said little, but when their gazes met, Clara felt the weight of his unspoken vow, that he would never again see her as a burden, but as his equal in all things. That night, as the children slept safe and the wind carried only the hush of the plains, Clara sat with her journal by the dim glow of the lantern. Her hand moved steady across the page. Asterisk, I was forced into this life. I came unwilling, afraid, believing myself broken, but the fire has burned away the girl I was. What remains is a woman who will fight, who will endure, who will not bend. Asterisk, she paused, then wrote. Asterisk, I did not choose this path, but I will walk it, and whatever waits beyond the horizon, I will meet it with head high and heart steady. Asterisk. She closed the book, set aside, and looked toward the dark sweep of land beyond the windows. The frontier stretched endless, ruthless, yet strangely full of promise. For the first time since leaving her father's wagon, she felt not fear, but strength. And so ends her tale for now. But what do we take from it? Perhaps this, that the frontier was not merely a place of dust and blood, but a crucible that tested every soul it touched. It did not care if you were man or woman, young or old. It demanded courage. Clara McGraw found hers, not in the vows spoken over her that fateful morning, but in the smoke and fire of night when death itself came knocking. If her story stirred your heart, linger with it a while. Share it, tell it. Let it remind you that strength is not born, it is forged. And if it moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comment below.